Hello, year two. Hope you've had a nice week. It's lovely to speak to you again. Today we are looking at a really famous, really quite bizarre, slightly odd story that's found in the Old Testament of the Bible. I wonder what you can tell me about the Old Testament. Can you remember anything we've looked at about it? So the Old Testament is the first half of the Bible. It's the oldest part of the Bible. It's between 4,500 and 2,500 years old. The stories in it are shared by Jewish people and also a lot of the time by Muslim people as well. They're not just Christian stories. But for Christians, they're really important. They're kind of the earliest stories they have. And as well, for non-Christians, they kind of tell us something about humanity. They tell us something about what humans were like that long ago, and they tell us something kind of about what humans are like now. So today's story is Abraham and his son Isaac. Let's have a quick look. So this story takes place a few generations after Adam and Eve, the first humans, and Cain and Abel, who were their sons. So they would have had children, and their children would have had children, and then we get to Abraham, and then we get to Abraham's son Isaac. So this is Abraham, and Abraham was very old because before we get to the story of Abraham and Isaac, actually the way that Isaac came about was a miracle because Sarah, who is Abraham's wife, when Sarah had Isaac, she was over 100 years old. She was really old, and Abraham was just as old as well. And so the son that they have, this son Isaac, he's a very special son. He was a gift from God. He was a miracle child, a very special child, given to them from God because they'd spent their whole lives being good Jewish people, or I suppose Jewish people at the time, being good followers of God at the time. So Abraham was chosen by God to be his servant, and God made a covenant. And a covenant, you've probably not heard that word before, covenant, as a special type of promise. And he said he would look after him and give him children, even though him and his wife were too old to have children. So God has promised to protect Abraham, promised to look after him, and promised to look after all of his children. I'm just going to close the window because they're mowing the grass outside. It's very loud. Getting rid of lots of lovely wildflowers. How sad. Okay, so this is Abraham and Sarah, and they have Isaac with them, and Isaac is this miracle child. You know, all their lives they'd wanted a child, and finally, when Sarah is over 100 years old, she gives birth to a child because God has, according to the story, blessed her with the child. God stuck to his covenant, to his special promise, and gave Abraham and Sarah a boy named Isaac to be their son. That's the first panel. Remember the last couple of lessons doing the same thing. So the first panel is here, and so you fill out a caption. Second panel, third panel, fourth panel. That's right, isn't it? Third panel, fourth panel. One day, when Isaac was in his early sort of childhood, so one day Isaac's about 10 or 11, one day God decided to test Abraham. He told Abraham to take his son Isaac to the top of the mountain and to kill him as a sacrifice to God. So this is what I mean about it being such a bizarre, such a strange story. Why would God want him to kill his son, this special son who he'd been given? Why would God promise to look after Abraham and Isaac and then tell him to do this? Would you obey God if you were in this situation? Would you do what you were told and go out and do that? I don't think I would. Seems like a really... Abraham decided to trust God and follow his instructions. He took his son with him and headed for the mountain to prepare the sacrifice. And this word sacrifice is really important in the story. A sacrifice is when you give up something that you love or that you want for God or for someone else. So, for example, we don't sacrifice children anymore, obviously. We don't really sacrifice animals so much in this country, but you might give up some money on a Sunday to church, and that would be a sacrifice. At lunchtime, if someone came to you and said, "Oh, I didn't get any lunch, can I have half of your sandwich?" and you gave it to them, that's a sacrifice. So God is asking Abraham to give up something that he loves, which is his son. And so Abraham and Isaac set out on this journey. And they have to do it on top of a mountain. That's where the sacrifice takes place. And you can see in this picture, you've got Abraham with his staff, his walking stick, and Isaac, and they've collected up some wood. And Isaac thinks he's going out to kill a lamb, to kill sheep. But as we find out, that's not what Abraham and God had in store. So Abraham was nervous. He didn't want to sacrifice his son, but he feared God, and he wanted to follow his instructions. So he builds a stone altar, stone block. He puts the wood on top of it because he's going to burn the offering. That's what they did. They burnt the sacrifice afterwards. And he gets his son, and he ties up his son, and he's ready to do it. He takes the dagger, and he takes it above Isaac, and he is ready to kill his son, because that's how much he trusts God. That's how much he follows God's instructions. Again, I don't think I would do that. I don't think I'm not sure that that's what I would do. And I'm not sure many people would. I don't think you would either. But he was different. He had a much closer relationship with God. He really believed. He had that faith in God. It was very important. He could hear God. He could speak to God. He was afraid of God. So there he is. He's just about to kill Isaac. But an angel shouted, "Stop!" at Abraham, and Abraham suddenly and immediately dropped his dagger. So an angel appears out of nowhere. The angel says, "Stop, stop!" And Abraham drops his dagger, and Isaac looks very relieved at what's happened. Through the angel, God told Abraham that he had passed this test, and him and his family would be looked after by God forever. God provided a sheep for them to sacrifice instead of Isaac. So it's a test. God wanted to make sure that Abraham would do what he was told. It's kind of it's not a very nice test, is it? Can't have been nice for Isaac or for Abraham, but it's like the biggest thing God could have asked them to do. God asked him to give up the one thing that he loved the most in this world. God asked him to give up his miracle son, and he did it. And as a result, Christians and Jews believe, Muslims too, that the children of Abraham, the generations that came afterwards, of which Christians, Jews and Muslims all consider themselves to be still related to Abraham, they think that this covenant, this promise that God made to look after them still exists because Abraham followed God's instructions, because he feared God. So let's recap the story. We can use our 4 boxes here. The first thing that happens is that Abraham and Sarah have a baby called Isaac, and it's very special. It's a miracle baby because Sarah is very, very old. The next thing is that God tells Abraham to take Isaac to the top of a mountain and sacrifice him. Now you can check the spelling on that word, but I would like you to use it, sacrifice. So he tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on top of a mountain. And so they go to the top of the mountain, and Abraham ties up Isaac, and he's ready to sacrifice him. He's ready to kill him, even though it's probably the last thing he would ever want to do in his life. He raises the dagger up above him, but then at the last minute, an angel appears, and the angel points to a sheep which is caught up in the thorns, as you can see in the picture, and says, "This is the sacrifice. God, you passed God's test, and now you and your family will be looked after forever." So this is another story from the book of Genesis. Why do you think Abraham decided to follow God's instructions? I think he was afraid. I think he was afraid of God, but also I think he trusted God. I think he knew that God knew what he was doing. God knew what he was doing. I think that's the best explanation I can think of, because, again, I keep saying, I don't think I would have followed God's instructions. Maybe that makes me a bad person. I don't know. I mean, it only really matters if you do believe in God and you think God is real. Obviously, this is a really interesting story, even if you don't believe in God, but it provides some pretty big questions for people, whether they're Christian or Jewish or Muslim, who do believe in God and do believe that this story has, if it's not actually true, it has some truth in it. So how might God have reacted if he didn't? That's a really good question. How do you think God would have reacted if if Abraham had refused to sacrifice Isaac? I think he would have been very angry. I think he might have killed them anyway. I think maybe this was a really sensible thing to do. I hadn't even thought of that. Goodness. And then finally, what does it teach Christians today? Or as I say, Jewish people or Muslim people who share the same story? Well, I think it teaches them that they need to have trust and faith in God, if they believe in God, which obviously they do if they're Christian. But I also think it teaches them that they can't. It's not always obvious what the right thing to do is. Sometimes you have to put your trust and faith in other people and in God as well. At least that's what I think. You probably have different answers, and I wish I could hear what you were telling me, because I'm sure like you have amazing ideas about this story and about what it means. It's such an important story in the world. If you ever go to the National Gallery, you can go and see some amazing paintings of this story of Abraham and Isaac. So don't forget to fill this in. Don't forget, if you're doing the extension questions, you have 2 extension questions today on Abraham and Isaac, which are here. I look forward to seeing you next week. If you've got any questions about the story, or if you want to find out more about it, do email me and let me know. And I really look forward to speaking to you again. Bye, you two.